It's summer 2030. I wake up to the oppressive heat, a suffocating blanket that clings to me even before I open my eyes. The air is thick and heavy, and every breath feels like inhaling warm steam. I can hear the city outside, but it's not the familiar sounds of life going on. It's the dissonant noise of chaos, the crackle of fires that refuse to die out, the distant cries of unrest, and the relentless hum of desperation. Stepping outside is an ordeal. The sun is an unforgiving force, a blazing orb that drives me back into the shadows. The streets are swollen with people, refugees from the countryside where the land has turned to dust and crops have shriveled away. They have come here hoping to find something better, but all they find is more of the same. Scarcity, hunger, and tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. Water has become a treasure, rationed out in agonizingly small portions. I stand in line for hours, clutching a jug, hoping today I'll get enough to last until tomorrow. The rivers have dried up, leaving behind cracked earth and the bones of a world that once was. The heat is relentless, and every day it seems to burn a little hotter, a little closer to the breaking point. Tensions simmer just beneath the surface, and it doesn't take much to ignite them. Fights break out over a handful of rice, over a place in the shade, over a cup of water. The government's hold is slipping, the cracks in its authority widening as the days grow hotter and the nights more restless. In the shadows, I hear whispers of war, over water, over land, over survival itself. Extremist groups are quick to exploit the fear and division, and suddenly, the social order we took for granted is unraveling before my eyes. I can see the future, and it terrifies me. A world where conflict and environmental collapse feed off each other in a vicious cycle, spiraling into ever greater destruction. It's a future that feels all too close as I watch the foundations of my world crumble under the weight of heat, hunger, and hate. I think back to 2024. How did we get here?
Environmental degradation, particularly driven by climate change, has increasingly set in motion a destructive cycle that exacerbates living conditions and fuels human conflict. This cycle is characterized by interrelated processes where each element, environmental decline, deteriorating livelihoods, and human conflict, intensifies the others, creating a feedback loop that is difficult to break. The summer of 2024 has provided a stark illustration of how this cycle operates, with extreme heat events triggering a cascade of social, economic, and political consequences that deepen the underlying environmental crises. The cycle begins with environmental degradation, often accelerated by climate change. In recent years, rising global temperatures have led to more frequent and intense weather events, including droughts, heat waves, and erratic rainfall. These environmental changes disrupt ecosystems and deplete vital resources such as water and arable land. For example, regions like the Sahel in Africa and parts of the Middle East have seen significant reductions in water availability due to prolonged droughts, which are exacerbated by climate change. As resources become scarcer, competition for what remains intensifies. This competition is not only between individuals or communities, but can also escalate to conflicts between nations, particularly where transboundary resources like rivers are concerned. The situation in the Sahel, where nomadic herders and farmers clash over dwindling water supplies, is a microcosm of a broader global trend. As water becomes more scarce, the risk of conflict over these essential resources increases, setting the stage for the next phase of the cycle. As environmental degradation progresses, it directly impacts living conditions. Agriculture, which is heavily dependent on stable climatic conditions, suffers immensely. Crop failures, loss of livestock, and the collapse of rural economies push people into poverty, forcing them to migrate in search of better conditions. This migration often leads to overcrowding in urban areas, where infrastructure may be inadequate to support the influx of new residents. The resulting strain on urban resources, such as water, housing, and healthcare, can lead to social unrest. In many cases, migrants are seen as competitors for scarce jobs and services, exacerbating tensions between local populations and newcomers. This tension can quickly turn into violence, particularly in regions with existing ethnic, religious, or political divisions. The situation in India, where extreme heat has driven internal migration, highlights how environmental stress can lead to increased social tensions and conflict. Human conflict, whether it arises from competition over resources or social tensions in overcrowded areas, often leads to further environmental degradation. Conflicts disrupt governance and law enforcement, making it difficult to manage natural resources sustainably. In conflict zones, forests may be cut down to fuel war economies, rivers may be diverted or polluted by military activities, and agricultural lands may be abandoned, leading to desertification. Moreover, the environmental impacts of war are not confined to the conflict zones themselves. Refugee movements and the destruction of infrastructure can spread environmental degradation to neighboring regions. For instance, the civil war in Yemen has not only devastated the country's water infrastructure, but has also led to significant environmental damage in surrounding areas as displaced populations struggle to survive. The cycle of environmental degradation, worsening living conditions, and human conflict presents a formidable challenge. Each element in this cycle reinforces the others, creating a self-perpetuating loop that becomes increasingly difficult to break as time goes on. The events of 2024 serve as a stark reminder of the urgent need for integrated approaches to address these interconnected issues. To break the cycle, it is essential to address the root causes of environmental degradation, such as reducing greenhouse gas emissions and implementing sustainable resource management practices. At the same time, efforts must be made to improve living conditions, particularly in vulnerable regions, through investments in infrastructure, education, and healthcare. Conflict prevention and resolution mechanisms must also be strengthened to manage the inevitable tensions that arise as resources become scarcer. The cycle of environmental degradation, worsening living conditions, and human conflict is a clear manifestation of the complex interplay between climate, society, and politics. As the impacts of climate change become more pronounced, this cycle will likely intensify, leading to more frequent and severe conflicts. The lessons from the summer of 2024 are clear. Without concerted global action to address the underlying environmental and social drivers, the world will face an increasingly unstable and dangerous future. Addressing this cycle requires a holistic approach that integrates environmental sustainability, social resilience, and conflict prevention. Only by breaking the links in this cycle can we hope to achieve long-term stability and security.